I've already broken down who I think are the most likely candidates to finish as the top scoring running back in fantasy football for 2024. So now let's do it for wide receivers. And just like in that video, I'm going to look at the past 8 wide receiver ones, kind of break down the ingredients that led to them being the overall wide receiver one that year. Of course, I'm going to then give you the potential candidates for this year, the most likely guys who could do it. And finally, at the end, I will, of course, make my pick for who I think will be this year's wide receiver one. Now, when we look at the last 8 wide receiver ones, we see Antonio Brown, then Antonio Brown again. That's right. Before he went crazy, he was actually a stud wide receiver in fantasy and in real life. Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams again, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and of course last year, CeeDee Lamb. Now, the first thing that stands out here is Cooper Kupp. He was the only one of these guys who wasn't being drafted as a top 12 wide receiver that finished as the wide receiver one that year. Every one of these guys were all known studs. We knew they were going to be great before they were wide receiver ones. It doesn't mean that they were being drafted as the first wide receiver, but they were being drafted as a top 12 wide receiver. So I'm going to chalk up Cooper Kupp's here to an anomaly, and I'm going to say we probably need to look at the top 12 wide receivers currently being drafted to narrow down our list of candidates. Now, unlike the running back position where touchdowns were extremely important to being the RB1, we don't see that so much with the wide receivers. In fact, look at some of these touchdown years. Antonio Brown, the 2 years he did it, he had 12 and 9 touchdowns. The year Michael Thomas did it, only 9 touchdowns. The year Jefferson did it, only 8 touchdowns. So while it's important that these guys score touchdowns, of course, because you're not going to be the wide receiver one with 1 or 2 touchdowns, it's not vital that you have, 15, 20 touchdowns like we saw with running backs. So then what are the most important things for being the wide receiver one? Well, easily it's a ton of catches and a ton of yards, which they kind of go hand in hand, right? If you have a ton of catches, you probably have a ton of yards. Every single one of these guys had at least 100 receptions, if not well over 100 receptions, and all of them 1,500 plus yards pretty much every single season, or close to 1,500 yards. So if we're going to look at guys who can actually contend here, I think there's 3 things we need to look at. We need to be able to pencil them in for 100 plus, 115 plus receptions if possible, 1,500 plus receiving yards if possible, and we want at least a decent chance at scoring, say, 9 to 10 touchdowns this year. They don't have to be a monster as far as touchdowns goes, but they can't get you just a handful of touchdowns and be the wide receiver one. Now, like I said, we want to look at the wide receivers being drafted early, the top 12 wide receivers. So the guys I'm going to look at here are CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, and Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, this is 11 wide receivers, but these are pretty much the consensus top 11 on every site. After this, you get like guys kind of mixed and matched. Some sites you'll have like Evans, Diggs, Debo, Ayuk, Pittman, all sorts of different guys here. So I'm just going to look at these 11 because, again, almost always the top scoring wide receiver comes from one of these picks. And let's start at the top with the guy who was the number 1 wide receiver last year. That is CeeDee Lamb. Now, we already know he checks every box because last year led the league in receptions. I think he surpassed Tyreek Hill for yards, had enough touchdowns. Of course, ended the season as the wide receiver one. The worry here for CeeDee Lamb right now, of course, is this holdout. No contract extension. He's not even with the Dallas Cowboys right now. It doesn't sound like they're anywhere close to getting this resolved. I don't think CeeDee Lamb is going to hold out. I really don't. But what I worry about here is, what if he misses all or most of camp? What if he comes into the season rusty, not complete game shape, not up to speed? Not that he needs to get up to speed with the offense, but up to speed with the NFL game speed. First of all, there's a chance he gets off to a very slow start. Second of all, there's a chance for acclimation injury, right? The body's got to get used to playing NFL football again. So we know he has the potential to do it. He did it last year. Hopefully this contract dispute gets resolved sooner rather than later. So I think we have to put CeeDee Lamb in the list of contenders either way. Next up is Tyreek Hill, who probably would have been the wide receiver one last year had he not injured his ankle in week 14. This guy was not only dominating all wide receivers prior to that point, he was dominating everybody. I mean, this guy was way better than even Christian McCaffrey on a weekly basis last year prior to that injury. Back-to-back 1,700-yard seasons in this Dolphins offense. We know the touchdown upside is there. Everything is there for Tyreek Hill. Checks all the boxes. Definitely have to put him in the list of contenders. Next up is Jamar Chase, and it's kind of surprising to think he's only reached 100 receptions one time. That was last year. He hit 100 right on the nose, and he's never reached 1,500 yards. But we know he has the potential. We know he has the talent. It really just comes down to him and Joe Burrow staying healthy all season long. If they do, this is a guy who can definitely be one of the top, if not the top, wide receivers in receptions, in yards, and in touchdowns. So again, Ja'Marr Chase definitely has to be in the list of the contenders for the top scoring wide receiver. And then the guy who's been the best wide receiver ever through his first 4 years, that's Justin Jefferson, was the wide receiver 1 2 years ago. There's a chance he would have been the wide receiver 1 last year had he not gotten hurt. This guy still went over 1,000 yards last year despite missing, 5-6 games and then having to play with Nick Mullins the rest of the season. This guy is complete stud. I'm pretty sure this is as close as we have ever seen to a wide receiver being absolutely QB proof, at least in the last decade. So even though there are some concerns about the QB play, we know it's going to be Sam Darnold. If necessary, they will turn to Nick Mullins, which was okay last year for him. I still think Justin Jefferson is so good, and he's in such a good situation in this Minnesota offense with Kevin O'Connell, where he's going to be, the focal point of the offense every single snap. I think he still has the potential to be the overall wide receiver 1. So, yep, we're putting him in the list of contenders. And then the guy I've been talking up all offseason, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 119 catches last year, 1,515 yards, 10 touchdowns. That would be a check. Checks every single box. I think he was the wide receiver 3 last year overall in your PPR leagues. And look, it wouldn't be shocking if he took another step forward this year, had more receptions, had more yards, had some more touchdowns. And if he does, he's got all the makings to be this year's number 1 scoring wide receiver. So I'm putting Amon-Ra St. Brown in the contender list. Then we got A.J. Brown, who last year 106 receptions, 1,456 yards, but only 7 touchdowns. This Eagles offense in the second half last year really was not very good. But look, they brought in new OC, Kellen Moore. One thing about Kellen Moore, a former quarterback, he wants to throw the ball. He knows how to get these wide receivers into good situations. He's going to line A.J. Brown up all over the field, use him in pre-snap motion, get him reps out of the slot. I think we could see one of the best years ever from A.J. Brown. So even though it doesn't feel like A.J. Brown has ever come close to being the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, I think we have to consider him one of the contenders. And now we start to get to the guys that have some question marks, starting with Garrett Wilson. I mean, the big question mark here is Aaron Rodgers. Not only can Aaron Rodgers stay healthy all year, but what version of Aaron Rodgers are we getting? We're not getting prime Aaron Rodgers here. That being said, I think if Aaron Rodgers is good enough, Garrett Wilson has the potential. Look, despite playing with awful quarterbacks for his first 2 years, he's still gone over 1,000 yards each of his first 2 years, can easily go over 100 receptions. I do worry here because they have such a good defense. They've bolstered that offensive line. They have an elite running back. Will they throw enough for him to get the targets and the receptions he needs? Like last year, he got peppered with targets, but that's because the Jets were terrible, right? They couldn't do anything on offense. They couldn't run the ball. They just had to throw it and hope for the best. But still, this is a great talent. If Aaron Rodgers is even close to anything he used to be, certainly has the potential, but I feel like this is starting to get to a bit of a long shot. So, I mean, Garrett Wilson, maybe, but it feels like a real outside, ceiling play here. So I'm going to leave him on the outside list of the contenders. Then there's Puka Nacua, who set the rookie record for receptions with 105, yards with 1,486, but only had 6 touchdowns last year, which, seems surprising in that Rams offense. I know a lot of people think like Cooper Kupp is back to being Stafford's number 1. I don't think so. I think Puka showed last year that he is the number 1. I think he's only going to get better into year 2. And look, there's always risk. Cooper Kupp misses many, many games this year, getting older, getting less durable. But even if Kupp stays healthy, I think Puka has the talent. I do think it's probably a bit of a stretch for him, bit of a long shot, because again, Kupp isn't going to be completely phased out of this offense, but they are going to throw enough to make it viable. But still, I like Puka Nacua. I think he's worth a first-round pick, early second-round pick, but I don't know if he can quite get to overall wide receiver 1 status this year. Then there's Chris Olave, who has never reached the 100-yard receiving mark, which seems a little surprising, but I guess when you're playing with Derek Carr and whoever the quarterbacks were 2 years ago when Jameis Winston got hurt, maybe it's not as surprising as we think. But he did average over 13 yards per reception last year, which is a good thing because if he does surpass the 100 reception yard mark this year, it means he's going to get, 1,300 plus, maybe 1,400 plus yards. And if he goes well over the 100 reception mark, he could eclipse that 1,500 yard mark. The issue here is, of course, he's on the Saints with Derek Carr. How many touchdowns can he really score? What's his catch rate going to be? Like, is he going to have a not high enough catch rate to get well over 100 receptions with Derek Carr? I have my doubts. I still like Chris Olave, especially in the middle of the second round. I think he has top 10 potential, maybe even top 5 potential if everything breaks right. But top 1, that feels like too much. Then there's a two-time wide receiver one, Davante Adams. Of course, he did it twice in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. He's yet to do it in Las Vegas, and I'm not sure this is going to be the year. We saw a huge drop-off from Davante Adams last year. Barely hit 100 receptions, but his yards fell from 1,500 the previous year to barely over 1,100 yards. And what's going to be different this year? It's going to be Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew at quarterback. They're going to want to hide these guys and try to run the ball as much as they can. It's not like suddenly Davante Adams is going to get peppered with more targets. He had 175 targets last year. He's not getting more than that. So, yeah, could Adams do what he did last year? 100 catches, 1,100 yards? Sure, but that is going to be far from the wide receiver one. And then we have rookie Marvin Harrison Jr. Does he have 100 catch, 1,500 yard potential? Definitely. He's in a great offense. He's a fantastic talent. He's going to get all the targets here. I mean, yeah, you got Trey McBride, but he's a tight end. You got Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson. I mean, this guy could certainly hit 100 receptions and 1,500 yards, but at the same time, that is a big ask for a rookie wide receiver. I mean, Justin Jefferson didn't do that. Jamar Chase didn't do that. Puka didn't do that last year. I don't know if Marvin Harrison can do that this year in year one. So despite him being in a great situation and despite how high I am on Marvin Harrison Jr. this year, I don't think I can list him as a contender for the wide receiver one. So now it's time to pick the guy I think will be this year's wide receiver one. Our candidates are CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and A.J. Brown. And honestly, it could be any of these guys. I mean, really, all these guys have a strong case for it. But if you've been watching me this offseason, you know who I think it is. I think it's Amon-Ra St. Brown. I've been saying it all offseason. I think he makes that CeeDee Lamb type of leap this year and ascends to the wide receiver one overall in fantasy football. Every year of his career so far, he's gotten better and better and better, and I think he does it again going into year 4. So my pick is Amon-Ra St. Brown. But again, any one of these guys has a great chance to be the overall wide receiver one. And if you missed that video where I break down the contenders for the overall RB1 and you want to find out who my pick was, well, I got you. It's right here.